Now, nobody in the US needs to be told about the devastation wrought by Superstorm Sandy on the US East Coast states of New York and New Jersey. The pictures that have been dominating US TV screens and newspaper headlines have been watched with a mixture of awe and dread in China too, a country that suffers its fair share of natural disasters almost every year. Indeed, Sandy brought uncomfortable reminders to Beijing residents of the destructive rainstorms that caused scores of deaths in the city in a matter of hours this summer and prompted calls for better disaster management in the capital. So what have Chinese net users got to say about the events of the past 72 hours in the US and how Americans have coped with them? And apart from the destruction, what about the political consequences with just a week before the country goes to the polls to elect a new president? To find out, let's join our researcher Julia Liu in the newsroom. Okay, Julia. Now, quite often we see responses from developed countries like the US to natural disasters in developing countries like China. This time, it's the other way around. What are you seeing from China's online community so far?
Well, as you might expect, a lot of net users express sympathy and send their thoughts to those along the East Coast. And of course, there's concern for Chinese people living in the affected area. Well, this comment from a poster on Weibo.com is quite typical. I pray for the American people suffering from this disaster and bless Chinese people living in the US. Put aside politics, all of humanity is a big family. And this poster, Meng Ying Xuelan, on iPhone.com has a similar comment. Natural disasters have no borders, and we should never gloat over the misfortunes of others. May those alive get stronger, and may the dead rest in peace. And an anonymous poster says, I hope all American people get over this crisis. I always hate to see any loss of life. While Dan Zeng Dacuo from Beijing has a more personal wish. I just called my younger sisters home, but no one answered. I guess they went to a shelter. I hope they're all safe. And a poster called Wang Yiping on Sohu.com sees it from a much broader perspective. Disaster forces people to re-examine themselves and realize the preciousness of peace and stability. But along with these expressions of sympathy, there are also a few people whose personal views of the US, or at least the government policy, affect their attitude. A poster called Feng Shui, also on Sohu.com, has this rather sharp opinion. People in countries like Afghanistan and Iraq might feel happy about this. Americans will focus more on disaster relief instead of committing murder and arson in these areas. This is good for the world peace. But in general, these comments are the exception. And a poster on 163.com points out that countries should unite in the face of a disaster. During the Wenchuan earthquake in Sichuan in 2008, many Americans donated money and prayed for the Chinese victims. Now Americans are suffering a huge major disaster. We have no reason to be gloat. And finally, on a lighter note, some posters can't help associating the storm to the supposed Mayan predictions about the end of the world on December 22nd, and disaster movies based on it, like 2012 and The Day After Tomorrow. Well, this poster has a short question. Is this the prelude to the end of the world?
Okay, now turning to another aspect of this story, before the arrival of this storm, Sandy, we had US presidential election campaign news every day. This storm has hit with less than a week to go until that election day, and there's speculation over who's going to come out better from this in political terms. What do net users feel about this political aspect of the story?
Well, net users are divided on this, as they are on who might win the election. But most seem to agree with this comment from Bao Beibei, who writes on Sina.com.cn. The weather factor has been an important variable in US politics before, and goes on to explain that Al Gore lost to George W. Bush during a severe drought, while the Bush administration was widely criticized for its slow reaction to Hurricane Katrina. And she feels this time is no exception and could penalize the president, especially because of the storm's effects on early voters, adding, public transportation and other infrastructure have been hit badly, and many people have had difficulty in getting out to vote. And polls show Obama gets more support amongst early voters than Romney. However, Xu Haipei, on the other hand, thinks Sandy will help Obama. His actions give him more exposure on TV. As long as he doesn't make mistakes like Bush did with Hurricane Katrina, it's a good way to improve his image. While Romney lacks this opportunity, and whatever he says seems inappropriate, so he has to stand aside. And Zheng Hao agrees. Obama can use this opportunity to use his presidential powers to direct citizens and help the victims. Meanwhile, Zhu Wenhui says on iPhone.com that the main effect of the disaster will be in the swing states, and reminds us Sandy is not over yet. How many casualties it ends up causing and how the rescue work is conducted here is a huge question mark. And then Li Xue has a nice summary of the situation. Writing on Sohu.com, he says, this presidential election began with uncertainty and will end in greater uncertainty.
Okay, finally, Julia, do net users feel there's anything that can be learned from this disaster and how ordinary Americans and the authorities there are coping with it?
Well, I have to say there's quite a bit of praise for the U.S. government for what most net users view were efficient precautions, a proactive attitude, and concern for the public. Jiepao on KDNet.net, who says he has personal experience of disaster, says, most of the losses have been due to the huge destructive power of nature. Damage caused through mismanagement, judgment, and incomplete preparations are at a minimum. This is why a natural disaster of this scale causes few casualties in the U.S. Modest poster Kui Gua Diantai, a Chinese overseas student, is also impressed, saying, closing traffic, closing stock exchange, organizing refugees, all of these cost money but can save lives. The government is using money to buy life and minimize the loss of life. This attitude is what the Chinese government lacks. And Li Jingnan on Sina.com comments on President Obama's performance. Obama said he doesn't care about the disaster's effect on the election in the interview. There's an element of the publicity stunt, but leaders in the U.S. definitely have the interests of the people at heart. And Wang Shu from Fujian is impressed by a more technical aspect, and it's the drainage system. Saying, the damage was mainly caused by wind. There was little flooding on the streets, so people didn't have to take to boats. And finally, I'll finish up with this more reflective post from Liao Ning. Humans' understandings of nature is incomplete. To completely understand Mother Nature will take us centuries more.
Okay, thanks, Julia.